So, director Akira Kurosawa has had a major impact on not just samurai films, but the Japanese movie industry as a whole. Kurosawa basically defined what we call the modern blockbuster, and also helped to launch the careers of many famous actors. He wasn't ever stuck on one single genre, but his name has become synonymous with the Jirageki genre or period piece, and of course often had a focus on samurai stories. The most famous, no doubt, we all know the name, Seven Samurai. And obviously, just as someone who watches a lot of these types of movies, I can't really tell you how many times I've seen Seven Samurai get remakes and just parodied over the years. Things like 11 Rebels, which we got recently, Beach of the War Gods, 13 Assassins, The Magnificent Seven, an episode or two of Samurai Jack.
We'll learn to protect and defend.
And they will show me to jump good?
No.
People really dig the concept of a ragtag group of heroes just banding together to take on a government or oppression or bandits. But it's too bad that most of the knockoffs really failed to understand why Kurosawa's work was so engaging in the first place, opting more so to focus on action instead of character building. And that's finally where Samurai Fury comes in. Under the original Japanese name of Muromachi Outsiders, this is yet another spin on the Seventh Samurai formula, that once again attempts to update the classic for a modern age. But does this, like so many before it, miss the point of Seven Samurai? Let's get into it. So Samurai Fury is a brand new samurai movie that came out in 2025. Directed by Irie and released back in January 15th of 2025 in Japan. And it's pretty insane that just now we're getting this in the West. Now on 4K and Blu-ray by Wellgo USA. And they've really been one of the companies just giving us brand new samurai releases. But I will say I was pretty unhappy with their 11 Rebels release because it was missing about a half hour of footage from the original. And because of that, I did look up Samurai Fury's runtime on IMDb, and luckily it's the same as on the disc. So I'm not sure if that was just a fluke with 11 Rebels. One day we'll find out. Unfortunately, I still haven't seen the original cut of that film, which is insane. But besides that, it is still nice that we're getting releases of new samurai films, especially on 4K. So with that all aside, let's get into the plot of Samurai Fury. It follows the tale of Hasuda Hyoe, and he's played by comedian Yo Oizumi. And I will say this is a pretty commanding performance by him that definitely breaks from his norm. It's really not how I'm used to watching him, so that is nice to see he has some range. But the character he's playing, Hasuda Hyoe, he's actually pretty underreported in Japanese history, being really mentioned by name only once in historical documents. But he is believed to have been the very first Ronin to lead a rebellion. And the narrative is adapted from writer Ryosuke Kakine's novel titled Muromachi Outsiders. And it tells of how Hyoe was able to just make this group of farmers, peasants, and even starving civilians to rise up against the Shogunate. And this was to combat inflated rates and just general desperation. Japan during the Muromachi period was really just a dire state to be in. And the set designs in the film really just get this point across. And at first, Samurai Fury is actually centered around a misfit bandit that Hyoe encounters named Saizo. And having previously worked for debt collectors until the Shogunate's personal security team ransacked them, Saizo is a boy with pretty strong spirit, and unfortunately no discipline. He does show some promise with the staff, but he can't quite swing it straight enough to be effective in battle. And so after bargaining with the security chief Doken, Hyoe takes Saizo under his wing and begins to train him. So really for the first hour of this movie, the stakes are pretty small scale, and the film builds out the relationship between Hyoe and Saizo. And just in typical old school samurai fashion, Hyoe is the harsh sensei. You know, he's pretty eager to strike Saizo when needed, and he often speaks in riddles to him.
主は今死んだな。
But still, Hyoe really cares for his new pupil, and he warns him of the dangers of walking the path of the samurai. But Saizo casts aside his fears, so Hyoe entrusts him to another master to hone his combat skills. So I will say it is kind of hard to get a grip of what Samurai Fury is doing in just these opening moments, because the tone is really all over the place. At one point, Hyoe, for some reason, cuts through a toll booth with just reckless abandon, and this is all just to instill a lesson for Saizo. But at the next point, he's criticizing Saizo for being clumsy, while the score then shifts into this really goofy tone for some reason. There's also no true central antagonist to the story, and while the real conflict would be Saizo's skills just getting better over time, it's still never really made clear why Hyoe took an interest to him. And just peppered throughout the story is Hyoe's interactions with different villages, and they're either fighting off bandits or just dealing with starvation. Director Irie very much wants to make a statement about how the government is corrupt, but he doesn't really hang this story on the central antagonists. The closest thing we get is Doken, who has a past with Hyoe, but the two were really just rebels in ideology.
この世の矛盾を見たら、誰かが先鞭をつけねばならん。
And at some point we're told that money corrupted Doken, but he still isn't entirely ruthless. He's just really acting in his own interests. So, you know, you can't really blame him too much for that. And actually, much like Takashi Miike's 13 Assassins, Samurai Fury is a film with two distinct halves. Part 1, as I'll call it, is the character building side. But here it kind of fails to portray why anyone is all that important in just the grander scheme of things. Saizo does become stronger and he even beats up some guys, which leads him to gathering disciples of his own, but it still all feels rushed. Especially just considering how the second half of the film really just flips the scripts entirely. You know, it's like two different films. And it's not played off as well as 13 Assassins. You know, that felt excellent how they split that film into two halves. But this one ends up feeling more like just two different people made this movie. Part 2 of this movie definitely shifts more into Seven Samurai mode. We did get the half-baked tale of overthrowing the government that occasionally had some cool visuals and fights, but it's really more confusing than anything else. Considering there's no strong antagonist, like I said, I wasn't really sure what I was supposed to be rooting for or against. It's really not hard to disagree with Hyoe's desire to give power to the masses, but when his motives are never made clear and the story just keeps flashing between different perspectives, it never really comes together into an enjoyable whole. Way too many characters get introduced in the second half, so by the time we finally get to the big battle, I was mostly just lost with what was going on. At points though, I did really enjoy what the film was doing because I do love good character-based drama. Saizo's journey of self-discovery may be cliched, but it was still solid just due to the great acting by actor Nagao. And in general, I do think the acting is overall very good. It really is just that the film never settles on a particular tone that it wants to show you. It also isn't very interesting as a war film just because a lot of the action uses a shaky cam and some pretty low quality CGI. And we all know how I feel about CGI. I don't like it very much. But Saizo does get one pretty great scene where he just wipes out this group of samurai in a single take. But for the most part, the fights aren't the best that we've seen, especially from samurai movies lately. I feel 11 Rebels had much better fighting in that. Because in this, there's just too much mayhem going on. You know, I don't really like when it's not clear what's happening. And it's interesting because you could really compare this film to 11 Rebels, which just released. And they both have a really similar feel. You know, they're well made, they look good, but there's uneven storytelling and just sloppy execution. And it all did come into my mind when I was watching this, just as I had recently seen that and reviewed it. 11 Rebels had production problems of its own, but both films ultimately fail at honing in on any specific style. And it's really the downfall of both of these movies. You know, if this is the new modern day samurai standard, then I'm a bit worried. You know, this could get old very fast. So again, both films are well made in certain aspects and great in others, but it's just not very consistent. And by the time the credits rolled for this film, there was really nothing about it that just felt different enough for me to call it a great movie. But there was also nothing really bad about it. You know, this is just a safe, run-of-the-mill action film that Japan just loves to pump out lately. You know, just a love of remaking Seventh Samurai for a newer generation is pretty strong. So I don't blame the director for attempting that. So, you know, overall, you know, check it out if you want to see just a decent, modern samurai action film. Luckily, it's not very expensive to own on 4K, so I'm not really mad that I bought it. Again, this is just a very similar feel to what I got with 11 Rebels. And if I compare both of them, I probably like 11 Rebels more. Just because I feel like that one had better action scenes and fighting. It was also pretty fun how they had like explosives and stuff. But you know, maybe after I watch this movie a few times, I'll like it more. You know, it's still just very fresh in my mind. Anyway, let me know what you think of Samurai Fury. Did you like it? Do you feel like this is the new modern day samurai standard? You know, just let me know in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.